We're thrilled today to invite you all here to join us with the wonderful Dr. Phil Wolfson, who's joining us from the United States, from California. Before we get into our session, as many of you will know, we're just going to do a short introduction just to introduce anyone who's new to Mind Medicine Australia, to the work that we're doing. And then I'll very happily hand over to Phil, who'll be speaking to you all today about ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. And so, to begin with, looking at the mental health epidemic, as we often call it in Australia, the mental health statistics in Australia, as is true around many countries in the world, really aren't great. Pre-COVID, we had 1 in 5 Australian adults with a chronic mental illness, 1 in 7 Australians on antidepressants. As you can see here, 95% increase in the last 15 years, 1 in 30 children with child prescriptions, 1 in 4 older people. And a lot of these medications have dependency, side effects, withdrawal symptoms, those things we know. There's huge costs to this, most importantly to human life and to the potential, but there are also costs to society that come along with the immense challenges that come with mental health. And as we've seen over the last 4 years since MMA started, there's been a lot of resistance to change from many stakeholders in the mental health system. And so despite the best efforts of clinicians, we haven't been seeing huge change in positive outcomes. The elephant in the room of the system, as we say at MMA, is treatment effectiveness and a lack of innovation. There's been minimal innovation and change over 50 years, and we've largely seen stalled treatment outcomes. Depression rates are as low as 35%. Depression remission rates are as low as 35%. PTSD even lower. And when we look at things like eating disorders, those challenges can be even greater still. And so a more of the same approach isn't likely to solve the problem that we have at this system. So introducing Mind Medicine Australia. We're a charity, not-for-profit, focused on alleviating suffering through innovation of the mental health care system, looking at the whole system. Our primary focus is on bringing psychedelic assisted therapies, Psilocybin, MDMA, and also ketamine as the 3 primary ones which have the greatest evidence base behind them at this point into the health system in a controlled way. The indications of success is that we're seeking to bring these therapies into the mental health system as an integral part of it. So they're achieving high remission rates, leading to a substantial improvement of those mental health statistics we just spoke about. And really importantly, that these therapies are both accessible and affordable for all Australians in need. So, just to give a brief overview of how we're working at Mind Medicine Australia to achieve this, we have 4 strategic pillars that we work towards that all work together to help develop the ecosystem as a whole. The first of these is awareness and knowledge building. We speak with various stakeholder groups with a focus on increasing the understanding of the evidence base behind these therapies. And we do this through many forms. So this webinar today is an example of that, but we also do it through outreach, working through the media, summits. We ran a conference back in 2021 and plan to do further in future. That leads into our second strategic pillar, which is a professional development program. We launched Australia's first, and actually the Southern Hemisphere's first, certificate in psychedelic assisted therapies in 2021. So it's now in its 3rd year. This training program has a world-leading faculty. And in addition to that, we've recently launched a supervision and mentoring program for graduates of this program as a way for clinicians who are looking to work in this space to continue to develop and deepen their understanding. The third pillar is looking at supporting research and education. We campaigned with the Morrison government actually before Albanese came into power, successfully for a $15 million grant to support research into psychedelic assisted therapies, which was, and I believe still could be, the largest government grant specifically for psychedelic assisted therapies in the world. We promoted the establishment of the Neuromedicines Discovery Center, which is at Monash University, to look further into developing psychedelic medicines. And then just recently, we've helped to fund a psychedelic registry, which is being run by ANU in Canberra, with the aim of collecting data from patient outcomes as we see psychedelic assisted therapies, specifically MDMA and Psilocybin assisted therapies being delivered in Australian clinics. And then the final of these strategic pillars is looking at supporting patient access. So this, to begin with, was very much about supporting regulatory change to allow access, and we'll speak about a little bit more of that in a moment, because our primary initiative in that realm last year was successful. And then, so now it's transitioning into supporting cost effectiveness, support accessibility, which includes funding for patients, both in terms of medicines, but also finding ways to subsidize treatment costs. And so to support the rollout of these therapies throughout Australia. And so that covers these four strategic pillars that we have. And in this last one, as mentioned, our main initiative for last year was successful, which was to advocate for and apply for the rescheduling of psilocybin and MDMA. In February, these applications were announced to be successful, which made Australia the first country in the world to formally recognize these two substances as medicines. And so this has brought into place this rescheduling, which now means that over the coming months, we will start to see access to MDMA-assisted therapy and psilocybin-assisted therapy within Australia. But as a part of this, we do have an obligation to get it right. And so just to give a few details of this before I hand over to Phil, what does this rescheduling mean? It means that psychiatrists who have trained in psychedelic-assisted therapies can apply to become an authorized prescriber of MDMA for PTSD and or psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. To apply, a psychiatrist must first submit details of their protocols, as well as their justification for prescribing and the training they've been through, to a research ethics committee. Once an ethics committee has approved that application, they will then apply to the TGA. And for Phil, the TGA is our equivalent of the FDA, as you may not know that one, to become an authorized prescriber. And then as an authorized prescriber, they'll be able to prescribe MDMA and psilocybin-assisted therapies for patients who've failed with currently available treatments only for the conditions I mentioned earlier. And the treatment protocols are short protocols that involve 1 to 3 dosing sessions with psychotherapy before and after each dosing session. So that gives a little bit of an overview of what this program is that's been approved by the TGA and is coming into place. And just to update everyone on the call, where are we at in terms of this? The authorized prescriber scheme for MDMA and psilocybin, it began from July 1st. The application process to become an AP or an authorized prescriber, it's taking some time. The ethics committees are reviewing closely protocols and all of the other details that psychiatrists have handed in. TGA also will then review after ethics committees approve. And so that process is still underway. And so no psychiatrists have yet received approval and begun delivering treatment. So we're still waiting a little bit before treatment begins. Requirements for importing medicines has also been made clear recently by the Office of Drug Control. An authorized prescribing psychiatrist must be named on import permits to bring medicine into Australia. And this is important because it does mean we have this first application process to become an authorized prescriber. And as psychiatrists complete that process, then we'll start being able to import some of the medicine so that then treatment can begin. And so we hope to see authorized prescribers over the next couple of months, but obviously a few unknowns still to find out exactly how long it will take. And so with everything up to speed there, little bit of details about a couple of our main programs at MMA before I pass over. Our certificate in psychedelic assisted therapies is it's pioneering, and it's the first training program of its kind in Australia. We have an amazing faculty, which is led by Dr. Geeta Vaid, who works very closely with Phil today. And Phil is also a member of this faculty, although he isn't listed on this page here. This program takes place over the course of, it's a 4-month training course, largely delivered online with a 1-week intensive residential component, which allows for experiential and practical skill development. And our current 2023 cohort is underway now, but we are accepting applications for next year, which we're looking will begin in April or May. In addition to the certificate program, as I mentioned earlier, we have a mentoring and supervision program for clinicians who have been through the CPAP program, and this is something for continued and further development. So any graduates who are on this call or anyone who is thinking about working in this space and has undergone training, please get in touch if these sessions is something you're interested in joining. And then finally, for future events, today we have Dr. Phil Wolfson, but over the next couple of months, we do have further webinars. We have Dr. Rachel Harris, Wade Davis, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and Gita Vade joining in November, and then Gabor Mate is our last one for the year. So please do jump online, sign up for those so you can join us for those sessions in future. And just to finish up, please do help us out, stay informed, stay up to date. If you're able to donate, we really do appreciate any support we can receive. And we also are always open to help from volunteers, for anyone else who can help us out or to join our chapters. And so please do, after this session, find out how you can engage with us further and be involved. And so with that, with no further ado, because I know no one is here to hear me, I'll pass over to Dr. Phil Wolfson. And just to give a few words of introduction, Phil was a principal investigator for the MAPS sponsored phase 2 studies for MDMA for MDMA-assisted therapy, for PTSD. In addition to that, he works clinically with ketamine and does extensive training in the field of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. His book, The Ketamine Papers, which I've read quite a substantial amount of, and I can recommend extremely highly to anyone on this call. It's published by MAPS and really is one of the central pieces, or is the central piece of work in working with ketamine-assisted therapy. In addition, he was an activist in the 60s. He's a writer, practicing Buddhist, been living in the Bay Area for over 38 years. And so with that, I'll pass over to you, Phil, just with a huge thank you for joining us today. And it's great to have you here with us.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. And it's a pinnacle moment for you folks in Australia. I cut my teeth in the legal period for MDMA when we really created a revolution in psychotherapy back in the mid-'80s with Sasha Shulgin. And we were free to do the work. And we learned basically pretty much what there was to learn about working with MDMA in that period. And we tried to keep it from being scheduled by the DEA, which was unsuccessful. And they scheduled it in '86. And things went fairly dark, especially for research. So it's a great moment that you're awakening and coming into it for MDMA, psilocybin. I have very great respect for several of your colleagues. Stephen Hyde's Ketamine for Depression book was remarkable, the second book on ketamine. He's retired in Tasmania, worked in Australia itself, as did Angelo DiGiannis, and they've all been close to me, and I have learned from them. And Stephen in particular moved the practice of ketamine out of the intravenous territory of anesthesiology and into the office. And he was noted for that. And as you'll see in my slideshow, in 2015, he came into the first KRIA conference, which was an international conference on use of ketamine. And he brought with it his wisdom of treating people in office. I'm also aware that ketamine has been pretty beleaguered in terms of governmental allowance for its use. And I guess that's changing. I certainly hope that's changing. But let me tell you a little bit personally about me and how I got into this. I'm going to start you're going to allow me to share? Can I share my slideshow now?
You should be able to, yeah.
Is it on?
No, it hasn't come up.
Okay, let me get back. Okay, I'll be sorry for the technical. Here we go. Just one more sec. So I want to tell you a little bit personally how I got into this. I have been a psychedelic practitioner for a long, long time. I'm a psychotherapist for much longer. And in 1990, friends who were aware of ketamine gave me an IM session, my first session with ketamine. And having been around the block a lot without ever being dependent on a substance, it was one of the most, if not the most profound experience I had to date, as is commonly expressed by people who are very experienced in the field. Unfortunately, they didn't know my sensitivity. And so the amount they gave me was much greater than what I really needed. And I was sick for 2 days afterwards with nausea, vomiting, and weakness. And I was much younger. This is 33 years ago. But my experience was so profound in terms of my sense of meditation, Buddhist practice, and formlessness, turning me into an energy format, that I really didn't come to it again until the late 1990s, when we began a group with Ralph Metzner and myself and a bunch of other people. And we started as an ayahuasca group, and we began using ketamine about a year or two after. And I've done several hundred personal sessions, probably 250 or more sessions over these many years now, about 22 years. And I have done them intermittently, almost all with my men's group, which has survived for 24 years, has been a unique influence in my life. It's wonderful to have a men's group or a women's group that lives that long or has had 250 sessions over 25 years now. So I advocate for that. In any event, I began to think of ketamine for treatment about 2013. We were starting the MDMA, life-threatening illness program with MAPS, and I began to create a clinic for its use, and then the Ketamine Research Foundation. But for me, it was always about assisted psychotherapy, which is what I'm going to talk about, what I'm going to present to you. I think assisted psychotherapy is the way to go with all of these sacred molecules, that we don't unleash people to just be solo, that we sit with people, we help people to integrate their experience, and that's what it's about. For me, it's ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, ayahuasca-assisted psychotherapy, but it's an assisted psychotherapy. So this is my son, Helix's playful story of ketamine. So let me begin with a bit of the history. Ketamine is an analog of PCP, which had its day and was plastered with disrepute over violent episodes that occasionally happen with PCP. And as with all molecules that are of interest, analogs were created, and ketamine, like PCP, was an even more successful anesthetic. And it got worked up in the early 60s and got an FDA indication in 1970 as an anesthetic. It was named by the wife of the investigator Domino as a dissociative anesthetic, meaning there were inexplicable experiences occurring as people came out of the ketamine main part of the dissociation and started to have consciousness and were having hallucinations and journeys which were not expected and not worked up, and no one was talked to. And so it was kind of a horror show in its way. Anyway, the wife called this a dissociative anesthetic, meaning the body and mind were separated, which is the process of ketamine dosage-related effect. So as you take more and more of ketamine, you become more and more ego-dissolved. Ketamine is an extremely safe drug. That's why we can use it in office. It does not suppress respiration. And interestingly, the vernacular of K-hole comes from the military, where a medic would jump in a foxhole to an injured soldier and inject a large dose of ketamine, which would stop consciousness and save the soldier from further awareness of his injury. So that was the K-hole. Foxhole turned into a K-hole. The first use as a psychedelic that we know of occurred in 1971. I described this in my book, The Ketamine Papers, with John Lilly, who was a very unusual man. And then later in 1975, when Salvador Roquet began using it in his Mexican psychedelic experiences and brought it to the US to Stan Groff, Richard Jensen, Bill Richards, etc., in Maryland. Antidepressant effects were noted in the early 70s and attributed to a psychedelic afterglow. But then in Yale, just trying it out on a group of schizophrenics in his practice, Crystal found that it didn't ameliorate schizophrenic effects, but there was a decrease in depression amongst that people, and he began to work it up in single sessions for use as an antidepressant. In the US and abroad, there was an arbitrary creation of a low dose of 0.5 milligrams per kilogram provided over a 40-minute drip, which meant that the ketamine started slowly, it came into the system, and then it could be turned off. Why was it chosen at that level? Only because people in that time and still are avoiding it because of the war on drugs and don't want to really talk about the psychedelic effects or their being germane to the actual ketamine experience. Here and abroad as such, where it's been used, the dosage of ketamine in IV clinics has gone up remarkably, even to 2 milligrams per kilogram. But all of this is based on personal sensitivity. So when you do milligrams per kilogram, it's an ineffective way of using ketamine because ketamine, like all psychedelics, is personally based on your particular sensitivity to it. So that, for example, when I did my first dose, it was much too much. I learned where my sweet spot was, where I could have an extraordinary journey and not suffer from it and have memory for that journey. So everything is about learning where people's sensitivity lies and administering ketamine appropriately to that sensitivity. IV comes from the research setting and comes particularly because the anesthetic FDA indication meant that anesthesiologists had control of the substance from the start. So IV clinics in the US are gold mines, but they don't contain psychotherapy. Ketamine is administered as a drug. And your wonderful protocol, speaking of psychotherapy sessions, before and after, is what we do, 3-hour sessions, at least with integration following and subsequent integration sessions. So we treat it as a sacred medicine. Set and setting are imperative to the quality of the experience, and we avoid medicalization. We have a wonderful place to work. And when we do our large group experiences, as we've done with over 800 people in the Ketamine Training Center, there are groups of about 36, 38 who are over a 5 or 6 day period, have a personal experience as practitioners with both the sublingual, which is saliva really, and IM ketamine experiences. The gold mine in the US has flooded with thousands and thousands of people taking ketamine in clinics or getting it sent over the internet from a variety of agencies who don't really do treatment, but dispense the medicine to critique. So we began with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy about 2014, 15 in 2 modes, trance and transformation, depending on dosage. We use 2 methods, sublingual, which is a lozenge that dissolves rapidly, and then the saliva is held in the mouth. We advocate at least 15 minutes and it's absorbed through the mucosa of the linings of the mouth. And we use intramuscular injections, which take hold in 2 to 3 minutes. And we can do dosage escalation for both of those methods, from very low dose to significant doses with ego dissolution, though the IM is more powerful and we can deliver much more powerful experiences that way. CAP is emerging with us as a first-line antidepressant. The reasons for that are very clear, because unlike antidepressants, CAP is an immediate experience. It's a psychotherapy experience. The onset is right away. We don't have to wait 2 to 6 weeks to assess antidepressant effects. It's anti-suicidal, and unlike the warnings that we have on black box for perhaps suicidal ideation and behavior in the early phase of antidepressant use. We use it first line for treatment of depression, PTSD, OCD, existential distress, relationship issues, couples issues, and group. It's wonderful to use in group. Esketamine, and we'll talk about that. So the general use of ketamine off-label is with a stereoisomeric, a racemic mixture. Left hand is esketamine, right hand is R-ketamine. This is how they're superimposable but separate. That's the meaning of isomers. So the right-handed R-ketamine is a quarter as powerful as the left-handed esketamine. So in the mixtures we use, 75% of the effect comes from esketamine. So we're always using it. There's no reason to use Spravato. And the R-ketamine is about a quarter of the effect. If you use more R-ketamine than is in the mixture, you will get the same effects as you get from esketamine alone or the mixture of R and S. So Spravato is a myth. It's been used because FDA approved it for their own reasons. It should probably never been patented because of prior use. And if you look at the economics, Spravato is $950 in the US against, if you use a similar intranasal RS mixture, it'd be by $20 or $30. There's really no reason to use it. And the REMS, which is the risk evaluation and mitigation strategies FDA puts on use of substances, that the REMS require 2 hours in a doctor's office, use of another antidepressant alongside Spravato, and it's just not worth it. So that's a critique. You'll hear more about it over time. 2 basic rules of ketamine administration. The effect of ketamine is based on the quantity absorbed, no matter what the route, whether it's IV, IM, IN, anal absorption, whatever. And the second is the effect of ketamine is based on the speed of absorption. So with the IM, it's 2 to 3 minutes to moving towards a peak effect in a few minutes. With the sublingual, it takes longer. It's about 20 minutes, depending on the person. So those are the 2 main rules for looking at how you administer ketamine. The basic mechanism of action that's imputative, but mostly accepted science, is that it's a glutamatergic system neurotransmitter, which means it does not have effect from serotonergic, noradrenergic, and dopaminergic molecules such as antidepressants. So we can co-use ketamine alongside mood stabilizers, other drugs, and antidepressants, lamotrigine being the one substance that may cause diminution of effect. Its actual mechanism is thought to be NMDA antagonism, particularly at one of the NMDA receptors. There's a lot of bogus stuff around NMDA receptors. There are hundreds of them, 40 or so have been characterized, probably more to date, and one in particular seems to be responsible for both the antidepressant effect at the site and the psychedelic site. Neuroplasticity is bandied around, but from my point of view, neuroplasticity occurs with everything. The speed of neuroplasticity is variously calculated from rodents. And remember, rodents have 30 million neurons and we have 86 billion neurons. So any research, be careful of extrapolating from rodents to humans. They don't talk either. Ketamine is converted to its active metabolite, norketamine, in the liver. If you swallow it, you get more norketamine because it goes through the liver through gut absorption. And the half-life of ketamine is 2.2 hours. The half-life of norketamine is 1.2 hours. When you do the sublingual or IM, you get much less norketamine because you're not going through the liver right away. And ketamine's duration of action per person seems to be about the same no matter what dose they receive. So it's a very active enzymatic degradation. Signature, we speak of medicines of this sort as having their own signatures that differentiates them. So one of the things that's all current is to talk about classical psychedelics which exclude MDMA, ketamine, and many others, and they're reputed to be 5-HT2A neurotransmitter driven. The problem with that is, if that was the sole explanation, there would be no differentiation between the molecules. So we know it's intracellular, and even that is very complex, and all the stories about BDNF and various other things are to be taken with a grain of salt. They're constantly changing. What we really want to look at is the experience itself. Neuroscience tends to be reductionistic and inadequate to talk about really what we're experiencing at this point. So ketamine's particular signature is rapid onset, rapid metabolism, dose-related access to therapy, sharing, and ego dissolution. It's an out-of-body experience, out of time and space. It reduces progressively external sensations, depending again on dose, to the point where people are totally in the ketamine experience and are not sensitive to the outside whatsoever. Sometimes that leads to agitation, which we have dubbed in really an enactment of the experience inside, produced in body language. Most people are very quiet. It's a preservation of the observer monitor. Remember, with all psychedelics, if there isn't preservation of the observer monitor, then there's nothing to talk about. You've exceeded your ability to have an experience. That's true of ketamine. If you produce an anesthetic dose, you're not going to remember anything. You're not going to have an experience. That's true for every psychedelic, including MDMA. If you go too high, you lose the experience itself. With MDMA, that's very hard to do. With psilocybin, it's less hard to do, but it's a mammoth experience. So the other essential part is that ketamine delivers us from attachment. In the Buddhist sense, we look at it as primal awareness, dzogchen, but a letting go of attachments, which is a very useful state for all of us. It's transformative, and it leads us into a reformation of mind, consciousness, spirit. So ego dissolution is progressive. The more you take, the less ego you have. It leads to humility, cosmic consciousness, and a tendency towards tolerance, anti-prejudice, pro-community. It's not always that way, but it often is that way. And there's an absence of negative emotion. Ketamine work is generally very positive. People come out of great depressive beginnings and into joy, often, not always, but it tends to be positive, neutral to positive, reliably, which is a wonderful thing to know about in medicine. There's a reduction of verbal thinking. The more you take, the less verbal you are, and a heightening of internal visual experience. So you're looking at ketamine experience from your observer status, but watching the visual aspect of it. There's a fluid connectivity and thematic movement. The more you take, the more you have colors, themes, and full stories and experiences. It can be the most experiential you have. It doesn't compare to an ayahuasca coloration, but ketamine is an extraordinary, colorful, thematic story experience for many people, depending on dose and experience. And as we dissolve into formlessness, we become energy and feel ourselves as energy, which is vital and useful to us. There's little experience to direct the ketamine consciousness, except at lower doses, where we can do therapy in a wonderful way, maybe highly emotional with highly positive effect, leading to sensations of love, connectedness. People see God. Sometimes, fairly frequently, people have an encounter where they experience a sense of death, but experience it particularly comfortably and go on and leave that experience. It can be sensual, and it can be very wonderfully sexual if used well. Ketamine with marijuana is a very enhanced experience. We use that in our clinic where marijuana is legal in California to enhance ketamine effects. I'm bringing that to your attention. So we speak of trance and transformation as our two major states that we try and achieve. Trance is a lower dose experience, depending on sensitivity, a timeout from ordinary mind, a reduction or elimination of negative thoughts, a reduction in thoughts generally, but at a lower dose, not the potentiality for self-expression and dialogue. So like MDMA, you could do wonderful therapy with ketamine, depending on dose and depending on where you are in the time frame of its metabolism. This leads to an absence of negativity, a sense of relief, and the opportunity for newness and liberation of mind and spirit. We use, so there's a potential for respite and meditative presence. We speak of ketamine as an enhanced meditation experience. I think I've covered most of this. So then we speak of transformation. We use IM ketamine to produce complete out-of-body ego-dissolved experiences, but we also use IM ketamine for low-dose experiences at much lower amounts. So we may start even at 10 milligrams IM, which for many people is just a mild ego-dissolved state, and we'll go as high as 130 milligrams IM. Depending on sensitivity, we've worked up people to over 200 milligrams IM because they're insensitive, but they're also susceptible to its good influence, and they don't have any more side effects. This is all about metabolism. Integrative psychotherapy follows many methodologies from internal family systems, psychodynamic systems, Gestalt systems. It depends on the training and skill of the therapist. I use many different methodologies. I've always been people-centered and try to understand where people are coming from and reach them on a personal psychodynamic level. I use a lot of self-work, which is analogous to parts work, and very different methodologies. I do role-playing, all kinds of things. Music is essential. We have lots of playlists on our Ketamine Research Foundation website, if you want to look, or Ketamine Training Center website, both of which I hope you'll look at. That's their names. Ketamine Research Foundation is the parent organization. You can get to any of our sites through it. But if you don't use music, it's pretty bland and it doesn't move very well. Music does two things. It anchors us so that we can stay in touch a bit with reality, depending on dose, and it moves the experience along. Two streams in psychedelic work, the psychotherapy realm, which we're talking about tonight, but we also use deep experiences and then do very positive integration sessions where we are relying on the medicine, but we're also doing psychotherapy. When you look at psilocybin work, you'll see there's very little psychotherapy been done with it. It's mostly organizational or helping people, supporting people. But we're doing absolutely wonderful psychotherapy, and we would love to have MDMA come along with it to do psychotherapy. We'd love to get everything legalized. So the essence of meditation practice is the liberation from attachments that are the obstacles to a mindful, creative, flexible, humble, intelligent, ethical, and connected to life based on sharing, love, and community. That's really what we hope for. We don't press people into that. That comes from inner healing, which is another large subject, which we won't cover today, what that really comes from, what that means, what it's about. And that's a whole discussion for all of us to be having about what are the sources of change in our being and how do these substances liberate change in us, and why do we make change, and do we make all good changes? Obviously not. Ketamine remains the only legally available substance, but now you guys are moving into a whole other wonderful realm. I'm sure underground work will continue in Australia. It's burgeoning in the US because it's so expensive, and MDMA is unavailable till FDA approves, hopefully next year. And this is why I'm so excited about ketamine, which I really am. I love the work. I'm turning 80. I love doing the work. I will continue to love doing the work because with ketamine, MDMA, and the other substances, it's really a revolution in psychotherapy. You're going to enjoy yourselves, I can tell. It's going to be great for all of you, and you're going to really collaborate and talk about this new stream in your life and work as being something that really transforms your experience as practitioners. This is my model for what the guide is about. It will take a little too much time to look at, but I'm talking about balance. And balance is essential. Ketamine is a wonderful teacher of balance. We know when we're in balance. We know when we're out of balance. And keeping an eye on balance, whether it's ecological balance, prejudicial balance, social justice balance, relationship balance, food balance, sexual balance, whatever, knowing where we stand, not obliterating our sense of balance for other reasons, but being conscious humans, that's where balance serves us. This is from our paper of 235 people showing significant decrease in our patients' BDI and HAM-A scores. And commercialization is besetting us in the US. Don't know how it is in Australia, but it reduces the quality of care. In the US, because it's the only legal one, it's being dispensed as a drug to people who are not getting proper care or supervision. The argument being, as you pointed out in your introduction, that ketamine is not widely available. There are huge numbers of people who don't have access to any psychiatric care. And so dispensing it is a justifiable thing on a certain level, but you have to recognize it's a powerful hallucinogenic psychedelic, and you want to do that with proper psychiatric care and proper respect for its powers. So we serve a general clinical population, as you will be doing, and we have people from off the street. Cost is always an issue in the US. We don't have national health care, so it costs for our particular program are modest compared to the IV programs because we do a lot of at-home work. So we send medicine at home to people who are in a practice supervised by us with very limited amounts going home, and we watch the prescription. So we've never really had abuse of ketamine, though it certainly has street abuse. Commercialization, I won't go into it. I don't know if it's really applicable to you, but it adds a layer of profits to an already inflated pricing. In the US, a bunch of clinics have gone under and a bunch of new ones have emerged. They're mostly IV clinics. So routes of administration, IV, we've talked about it. And then the financial is very high in the US. Intramuscular, this is our preferred route for larger experiences. 2 to 3 minutes for onset. You can control dosage. You can give a second or third shot time to coincide with metabolism, not obliterating the first dose. Sublingual, we've been talking about that. That's the lozenge with saliva being the vehicle. There's also intranasal, which we use sometimes when people really don't like the taste of the ketamine lozenge or they have trouble with the lozenge itself. And this is one of our projects, Conscious Dying, Conscious Living, which is FDA approved with 5 sites for people who have a year or less to live. And I'm not going to take you through all of this because I want to leave room for questions. This is our site, our actual study. We've been doing studies with research with ketamine, which we're happy to collaborate. I've been collaborating with the New Zealand group that started their ketamine program, and I've been offering consultation to them, which has been fun for both of us, their group and me. This is our 5-site program. We have a non-ketamine thing called Indra's Net, which I won't take you through now. You can watch it on our website. And we are doing a program with veterans co-hosting with a group called Heroic Hearts. We're going to be doing a study to determine how long you hold the oral dose, and a low dose for premenstrual disorders, which we've established well. We have patents on that, and postpartum depression, and a variety of other programs. And these are my organizations as my concluding slide to you. I hope you'll join us, and I hope you'll be interested in our work as we are in your work, and that we build a close collaboration, not just with ketamine, but with psychedelic medicines as you explore their practice and get energized by them. Okay, thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Phil. We can open up to some questions now, and maybe if people want to share some questions in the chat, but I have one for you maybe to start us off. And I'm curious to know, this is one I've thought about a little bit. Do you feel that when more research and evidence comes through, that ketamine is likely to show that it is equally potentially effective when used appropriately compared to something like psilocybin or MDMA? Because I feel that it's
I think it's more effective than psilocybin. In our hands. Remember, I've been doing this a long time, so I have, a history going back and watching hundreds of people. Ketamine is wonderful for PTSD, which is where psilocybin has been mostly pointed on now for depression. MDMA is wonderful for depression. It's not being pointed that way, unfortunately, but all of our substances are pluralistic. Ketamine, MDMA, psilocybin have multiple indications for use. They're not, we tend to follow FDA and get confused by it because we have to get an indication to legalize it for prescription. You don't anymore, but that's where we're at. So we get kind of pushed into a model that isn't true. Psychedelic medicines are pluripotential. They have effects on many things. And ketamine, properly used, we talk of an 85% success rate in our practice. It's something like that. It's not single experience. It's multiple experiences over time. But we have a wonderful time with it. So is one drug better than another? I think that's nonsense too. I think drugs are very different. They have different signatures. We should apply them differently, and we should apply them, thoughtfully in a variety of usages. So I don't think of one as better than another. I think of one as more effective for certain things than another. Ketamine is great for ego dissolution. Really great.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I think there's a couple of questions coming in the chat. One is John's asked if you have any experience working with people with autism.
I didn't get that. Sorry.
Any experience in using ketamine with autistics?
High functioning autism, there was a little work at Albert Einstein on that, not very successful. The best work with substances for autism has been marijuana work, which was Lester Grinspoon, who was really, Marijuana Reconsidered, psychedelic books. He's no longer with us. Did a bunch of work with autism and marijuana. MDMA was done by Charlie Grobe and Alicia Danforth, a very small pilot study with high-functioning autistic adults, and that showed a bit of efficacy in 1 or 2 measures, a sense of connection. So I think as long as the autism is not confusing, I mean, I have some very deep autistic people in my practice where ketamine experience would be entirely confusing. And I would not want to administer it. So for sociability, I would say MDMA is probably the most promising agent for autism, but I think ketamine at low dose has a place as long as people aren't messed up and confused more, can't process the experience.
Fantastic, thank you. Craig's also asked anything regarding using ketamine with anxiety.
Oh, we use it all the time with anxiety. The slide I showed you showed a major reduction in anxiety in our population and that was only 235 people. We're way over 1,000 now in our clinic alone, with tens of thousands of sessions now. So great for anxiety. We use it in low dose. We have various protocols for anxiety. We'll use a lozenge of 50 or 100 milligrams 7 days in a row to help people with anxiety, or if they're not energized, at bedtime. So there are a lot of ways to use ketamine very flexibly, and there are a lot of approaches you could take to anxiety rather than episodic use. You can use ketamine safely, low dose daily without habituation. Certainly no bladder dysfunction, cystitis. We haven't had it in our clinical population. That's at street use at high dosages over significant time periods.
Fantastic. Thank you. One question that's coming here, which I might just take quickly, which is Chris has asked about who's able to prescribe ketamine in Australia. And just to answer that one, generic ketamine or non-S-ketamine in Australia is used off-label for depression, is the way that it's prescribed there. So psychiatrists and other doctors who are able to use it in that sense can, and so it's just a question of finding doctors who are using it in that capacity. So just to come through a few more questions. Are the sessions guided? You speak of music being used. Is that used if you see the person getting low? Would you play upbeat music and vice versa?
People make their own playlists all the time. They got to be at least an hour and a half long, to cover the ketamine experience. Some people, including me, if I make a playlist, I have a beginning, middle, end, and I try and make the music very different. But everyone has a different idiosyncratic approach to what they like in music. We don't use classical, though Stan Grof started off with that. We don't like classical for this. We tend to use, trance music, gentle music, but sometimes we use activating music, particularly towards the middle of it. So we have access. You have access to our playlists if you use Dropbox. We have about 50 playlists on our site, which are free. You just have to have a real Dropbox program. So we like people to experiment. It's very particular to each individual.
Amazing.
We've never gotten along with jazz. We tried jazz a few times. It's very hard.
Do you have any theories of why that is?
It's too diffuse. It doesn't move it along. It's too intellectual.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Amazing.
Not that all jazz is intellectual. I'm not damning all jazz, but we tried kind of blue Miles Davis at one point. It didn't work at all.
Fascinating. Another question here. Any experience using ketamine-assisted psychotherapy to assist with bipolar?
Yes. We don't treat active mania, but we do treat bipolar depression. There are a bunch of papers on it. So when someone is in good control, if they've been manic or hypomanic, we will use ketamine, because depression is the most frequent aspect of being bipolar, and ketamine is a very good medicine for it.
Fantastic. A question here about combining different psychedelic medicines, and the specific example is opinions about combining MDMA and ketamine is the example that's been put forward.
People combine psychedelic medicines in all kinds of ways. So it's common to have MDMA, mushrooms, and then ketamine as a program, at least here in the States. It's common to use ketamine with MDMA or other substances, methadone. It's common to use ketamine with LSD, or so the ketamine is usually an aftermath. So with MDMA, it might be 3 or 4 hours out, and it changes the whole nature of that experience.
Amazing. And a question here, I think you've sort of addressed it, but do you have any opinion of any clinical difference between S-ketamine and using a racemic mixture?
None.
None at
It's
all.
a waste of money, no. S-ketamine is RS, is off-label ketamine. It's 50% of it. There's no reason to use S-ketamine whatsoever.
Fantastic.
It's going to go away, so it's going generic next year. Why worry about it?
Is it next year? Oh, wow, so soon.
The patent runs out next year.
That's fantastic. A question here. I believe you said ketamine works on the glutamine system, not serotonin, yet the psychedelic effect is very similar to serotonin psychedelics, which I thought was the basic neurological pathway. How is it that the glutamine system is so classically psychedelic?
No one knows the answer to that. Why is the serotonergic so classically psychedelic? I don't understand mechanisms of action. I think ketamine differentiates quite a bit from mescaline or from LSD or ayahuasca. It's a very different experience, but it crosses over. And this is about neural net mingling. This is about higher levels of mind interacting, being stimulated or suppressed by different substances in different ways. I think it's much less about intracellular, though that's important. It's much more about our mind and our brain coordinates, and different substances strike up different deals with different parts of the brain. And that's the nature of their differentiation. I mean, why bother with one like 5-MeO versus mescaline versus ketamine if they're not different? So people seek the differences between substances.
Amazing. Thank you. And another great question. How many sessions is there an average number of sessions that's needed, or is it one session, or do you quite flexible in your practice?
It's a good question. There are multiple sessions. Average duration of treatment, which is intermittent. We see people week intake, week 1. We'll skip a week unless there's high acuity, so we'll see them 2 weeks. Most average duration of a treatment plan is about up to around 6 months. We have people coming for maintenance, reinforcement over several years, but not on an every week basis. So we use at-home lozenge work to support the ketamine work, which makes it much more centered on the person with proper support. It's a terrific way to do the medicine with contact with us. So it becomes much less expensive that way, and there's more agency per person.
Fantastic. I'm just having a quick scroll through a couple of questions here. Now we've just got you till the hour, so maybe we'll just have one last question and then shall we finish up?
Your call, babe.
Let's do that.
Scott, it's up to you.
Do you have any advice for finding the sweet spot of ketamine dose and frequency? I think that's a great question to finish up on.
Sure. Go slowly and find the sweet spot. Give people experiences, know they're going to come back, and find the sweet spot. You can do a bit of that in a single session because you have enough time, and ketamine is very rapidly acting. Remember, you're going to go MDMA, that's going to be 6-hour sessions. You're going to do psilocybin, it's going to be 6 to 8 hour sessions. Ketamine with full psychotherapy is 3 hours. You know, I rarely do 3 sessions in a day, but I will do 2. I did 2 today. I'm a little tired. So you find the sweet spot over time. So for instance, in the 2 sessions today, they were very different dosages with adult males, and one was 75 milligram IM, one was 60 milligrams IM, and then we do dosage escalation, usually to begin with lozenges. So you just work your way up slowly, and you can repeat within the time frame to get to the sweet spot.
Fantastic.
Invite me to Australia, I'll train you.
I think that sounds like a great idea. I think we have been speaking with Gita maybe of coming out next year, and maybe we can get her to drag you with her.
My son and I bought a house on the ocean in Bali, so maybe we'll drag you all over to Bali for a session.
Oh, that sounds even better. Amazing. So I think on that note, perhaps let's wrap that up for today. But just to say a huge thank you, Phil, for joining us. An absolute pleasure to meet you, and a huge thank you to everyone for joining us today.
Congratulations. May it be sweet.
Thank you so much.